Greetings, everyone. It appears
Greetings.
that we
Yeah.
hello.
Hello there. So, welcome to another BMX live stream. The reason why we're going live on this very special time right now is it is Monday, with the day after the National Black HIV/AIDS Awareness Day, and we felt it prudent and necessary to talk about this subject. It's about a situation that's been ravaging our communities for many years. But before we get into that, my name is Duke. I am a health educator and program coordinator for Black Men's Exchange National, and I'm joined here with to my other side.
You got to look at the grid and see where we are.
looking like nah, the mirror ain't where I thought it was. But I'm joined here with DeQuayla Hopper.
Peace, everybody. My name is DeQuayla Hopper. I'm the Member Services Navigator at Black Men's Exchange and Black Women's Exchange, with focusing on heterosexual women and bisexual women.
Yes. And that is her contact information. If you're looking to get some services, it's also the same number for our community number. If you join our community number and you ask for DeQuayla, you'll be linked to get some services and navigations from her specifically. I also have Kashama Sankofa.
Peace, y'all. It's Kashama Sankofa. I'm sure you recognize me as well as DeQuayla from the BMX Health live streams. I am currently a health educator with Black Men's Exchange. Glad to be here.
And last, certainly not least, we have...
Greetings, everyone. I'm sorry. I want you to finish your introduction, Duke.
Dr. Monago.
Greetings, everyone. I love that picture of you, DeQuayla. Anyway, I'm Cleo, and we're here to talk about this issue of HIV/AIDS in the Black community, but from a perspective that is going to be directly affirming, informative, contextual, and organic to Black life and culture. And we're excited about it. And the theme was something about a package. Could somebody remind me about the package?
So the theme is refusing the package, protecting Black life. We'll probably go into exactly why we called it the package in just a little bit. Very quickly, I want to mention, because we sometimes never do this, and I think it's necessary. BMX, Black Men's Exchange National, was founded in 1989 by Dr. Cleo Monago. And BMX is dedicated to dismantling barriers to the well-being, dignity, self-respect, and protection, empowerment, and responsive public policy in the prevention of health threats among diverse males of African descent, 19 and up. But our work has been so widely accepted that we are rooted in dealing with the entire Black community, and we've been doing this work since 1989. So that is what joins us here today to talk about this topic. So refusing the package. Anyone's heard about he or she got the package? Y'all have heard that language before?
The package. Yeah, of course.
Well, you probably know its origins, Kashama. About how long ago did we start talking about that?
I was gonna say I may not know the origins, but I know when I started hearing it, I would say within the 90s, mid 90s, I heard it, and really, there a lot of words started being created during that time to explain the phenomenon. I think a lot of us didn't want to actually call it for what it was due to a lot of stigma.
Well, to do this topic appropriately, we need to talk about the Black history of HIV. And one of those things is the racist barriers that prevented treatment to our communities, not only just in terms of members getting access to healthcare, but also the economic disparities that was going on in our communities. Want to shout out to Anair. Thank you, Anair. Said thank you for telling us about BMX founding and what the org is about.
And that's Henri, actually. Brother Henri, is actually very active in his community in his own right. I believe down in Atlanta. So we thank you for tuning in, brother.
Shout outs.
Now I have a question before I say anything. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Okay. Because I just saw some interesting things that occurred. I want to make sure I was still here. Okay, I'm finished.
All right. So let's get into this history of HIV, y'all. So the epidemic hit our communities the hardest, to my knowledge, in the 80s. and that is when this particular virus devastated our communities, and it was around the same time as the quote unquote war on drugs. And so this is something else to consider for our communities. And so we were ravaged. Our communities was already dealing with economic disparity during the Reagan presidency. And so when Reagan became president, and he started doing what he was doing as far as getting narcotics into our particular cities, and Black people had absolutely no access to healthcare and welfare. Black people were getting strung out. Black people were going into different behavioral patterns in order to cope with the anxiety and the toughness and trials of life. And so therefore, Black people had higher numbers of violence, had higher numbers of being addicted to substance abuses, and a lot of them were having a lot of coping sex to cope with what was going on and not necessarily being protected during that particular time. And HIV pretty much came out of almost nowhere at that time. It just randomly hit the streets.
Also due to a lot of survival sex as well.
Yes.
And I'm glad that we even watched that documentary, I think it's called Crack on Netflix, because it did go into a lot of what Black women faced as a result of the crack epidemic and how it affected, issues such as sexual and trafficking.
And so I wasn't, I was born in 92, but I was not able to escape the false narratives that came up when it came to HIV in the Black community. I know when it was first announced that this virus was a thing and that it was impacting communities world over, they said that it came from Africa, that it came from some monkey in Africa. That was one of the things that I've heard. I also heard that after that was debunked, people said that it came from Haiti, very specifically Black nations or Black origins. And then it comes out many, many years later in, I want to say, early 2000s, that it was announced that patient zero was actually a white man who was just traveling on a plane, coming back from, I don't even know exactly where he was coming from, but traveling on the plane, he was patient zero. And so this is still, to this day, there's still many Black people who have not gotten the full history or context and think that HIV/AIDS was something that happened in a majority Black land, that it's something that Black people orchestrated.
I want Cleo to I guess kind of clarify this for us too, Duke, because not only was patient zero found to be a white man, but even the narrative around Haiti, HIV in Haiti, it was found that the strain that popped up in Haiti was the same strain that was found in the European or I guess US or white men who who were already spreading the strain.
The first person to put a name on being a person dealing with HIV was named George Dugas. George Dugas was a French-Canadian airplane steward. What do they call him now? Flight attendant. And the reason that they found out that he had this issue is because he took off from work and he started to have lesions, which we now know as Kaposi sarcoma. He was a white man, so the lesions were very easy to see. They were dark, very dark, and he started losing weight and he became very sick. George Dugas was the person to be first talked about in the media before he even had the name HIV. It was called a mysterious strain of death-causing symptoms among homosexual men. And the reason that is important to mention Dugas is because Dugas supposedly, they made this story up. Dugas supposedly, while being a flight attendant, somehow wound up in Zaire, in Africa, and supposedly picked up the bug in Africa. Now, what's important to reiterate, as Kashama said and as Duke mentioned, there kept being this reference to there being an African origin to this whole thing. But the getting French-Canadian George Dugas to be connected to Zaire was a stretch. And a lot of us know it was a stretch because we figured if Connie Chung said it, who was a very popular anchor person at the same time, it must be true. And as a matter of fact, even to this day, we think if it comes through the news and is on popular channels, it's being reported, that is indeed true. And often it's not. So after they blamed it on George Dugas as being patient zero, which also they found that he was not patient zero, that there were people before him who had HIV. He was just the first known case to get a public profile. What I'm going to focus on now to keep us where Black people are concerned, as you both mentioned, after they finished connecting Dugas to Zaire, which was a myth, they claimed that there was a monkey, a green monkey in Central Africa that tends to be around the so-called pygmy population that supposedly had something called SIV, which they made up, which stood for Simian Immune Deficiency Virus. So that was in the news. And that also got in movies that they made. They made movies where they recreated this myth about the monkey. Well, we've since learned that the green monkey, there's no such thing as SIV. And whatever those monkeys are dealing with has nothing to do with what human beings are dealing with, and that there's no connection at all to the so-called green monkey. However, there were books written, there were so-called scientific journals that re-articulated this myth. And then they went to Haiti. And they said in particular that the virus, which was not even called HIV yet, that's important to remember here, that came originally from Haiti. And as I think one of you mentioned, what they found out was that white men from Europe and from the United States were going to Port-au-Prince, taking advantage of poor people, buying their bodies, and they indeed white men brought HIV to Haiti. Mm-hmm. And that's very important for us to understand. But as one of you mentioned also, in the early 80s or the mid 80s, while they were talking about this virus and where it was coming from, that it was killing people, the Black community was already distracted with the so-called war on drugs, with racism, white supremacy, with murderous levels of police brutality, as we're still dealing with right now, and with having up to that late date, never on a collective basis even talking about sexuality outside of heterosexuality. And even that issue wasn't talked about from the mountaintops. There wasn't a lot of discussion about sexuality, period. A lot of young girls learned about their period by circumstance because of religious doctrine and self-consciousness, and a lot of people not normalizing having conversations about the body and about sex. A lot of people have been caught off guard around how to have sex from an intentional, healthy perspective. So when homosexuality was connected to this disease that didn't have a name yet, Black community was not ready to talk about that issue because it hadn't before. Along with the the virus being in the media, it was finally called GRID, which stands for Gay-Related Immune Deficiency. The white gay community, which was shoring up its power at the time, was offended by the same disease that was killing thousands of them being named after them. So they protested the word GRID, and finally the name was changed to HIV, Human Immunodeficiency Virus. So what I think is important to mention here, Duke, before I stop, is that this was a community that would not tolerate being disrespected or blamed for the disease. However, Black people were apprehensive to step up and say, why are you blaming it on Haiti? Why are you blaming it on Africa? As a matter of fact, we thought it must be true if white folks said it.
Well, part of this narrative, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've also heard and saw that when the virus was first making its waves in America, the media only focused on white victims, even though it had a Black origin far as where the virus supposedly came from. When it came to talking about who was dying from this virus, they only showed white victims, and particularly white gays in the community. So when Black people saw, from what I understand, when Black people saw the scope of who was dying, it was like, thank God it's not me, and moving on, even though there were plenty of Black victims that were just not getting any kind of coverage or empathy during this particular time period. And so this is something else that our community also struggled with. So it's like not wanting to talk about the sexuality thing, but also not knowing to talk about it at the same time, because we just weren't being covered at that particular point.
That's true. As a matter of fact, there was some straight up deliberate marginalization of the fact that Black people were impacted, because they did epidemiological tracking in New York and in Los Angeles, which had relatively large Black populations that were impacted, as well as San Francisco and the East Bay, which is Oakland, which at the time was less gentrified and more Black. And there was a sizable Black population among those who were infected, but white people actively marginalize those numbers so white people can be the ones who are attended to regarding resolving this issue.
Thanks.
So
Dr. Cleo, I'm sorry, I'm gonna say something real quick. There's so many stigmas around black people and HIV that we have to be real with ourselves and know that those stigmas affect how we how we view ourselves and how we view others, and ways in which we develop our sexual health habits. Even if we consciously know that these stigmas are just that, stigmas, we have to be willing to dig deeper into ourselves and into our relationships to understand and grasp our true nature, which has
Yes.
nothing to do with
And that really leads us very uniquely into how self-concept started to be perceived around this particular virus. And so we have a larger Black community that is not willing or wanting to engage with the sexuality discussion. Because we're dealing with so many other different things, and then you have sexuality and gender minorities within the Black community who are dealing with this virus head on, and not having any particular access to for communities to take care of them, to make sure they have well-beings, and then the communities that should have been, not only Black communities, but other communities that quote unquote should have been affirming them, these white spaces, LGBTQ identified, were very racist. They were very like there was so many different practices about making sure that there was a curfew for the community centers, specifically for Black people. There were of course, we don't even want to go into the medical industry directly, but the long-standing issues of the medical industry being prejudice against Black folks and prejudice against sexualities, two barriers towards our community members. And so these individuals within our community had to just deal with absolutely no way of care, deal with this particular virus, and they were dying out in extraordinary numbers. When we talk about reparations and when we talk about what needs to happen for our communities, we don't talk about that the HIV/AIDS epidemic was a legitimate Holocaust for our communities. Like, this is something that killed many elders, many youth. And there has been, when we talk about, passing down of knowledge, passing down from elders to speak to youth, this is a missing gap specifically in the Black community. Many people died, but this was one of the only communities that never had a chance to recover. And we'll talk about that when we get into the numbers of HIV transmissions today. But this is one of the communities that never had a chance to recover. And it's one of those silent, if you will, holocausts. Because it's one of those things where it's just like, yep, these people are gone. All of those resources are gone. All that history, that culture is gone. And then there's just no one is caring to talk enough about it. So this is why we have things like HIV Awareness Day specifically for the Black community.
Well, speaking of economic resources, dude, that gets us back to that whole narrative that was being promoted a lot throughout the 80s around white victims of the virus. And saying, so creating this narrative that we're the one who need it, we're the one who all these resources should go to. Now, another thing that happened is that this virus became framed completely and solely around LGBTQ sexuality and identity, which did not work for Black people because, as Cleo stated, we had not had even the conversations around sexuality and gender that we needed to have just among ourselves before the virus showed up. So when it showed up, there was still a lot of unpacking we needed to do around just being Black and what does gender and sexuality mean for us as Black people alone. So therefore, the whole methodology of prevention is that of a capitalistic white predatory setup, and in addition to that, it's a culturally incompetent setup because it does not address Black issues from the Black perspective, rather a white LGBTQ rainbow setup. And as we will see a little bit later in the program, Eazy-E wouldn't have had no business up in nobody's LGBTQ center.
Yeah, that's really important as far as that's really important as far as self-concept, because I know, like I said, I was born in 92, and so by 2004, I was already dealing with narratives in my community that, you can't be homosexual and Black. That's not That's not something that can happen. So I know it was something that was rampant during the 80s. And so with this lack of community dialogue and confusion around what is being quote unquote pro-Black, as Black people are trying to rightfully get a sense of identity, a sense of power structure that has been denied to them through so much violence that has been gender-based violence throughout the years. And so sexuality confused that subject for Black people. It was a very confusing subject, especially when you look at, and this is true today, far as who Black homosexuals were caught in relationships with. In court being quote unquote submissive to or in loving with and bringing those community members in as quote unquote family. There's so many different Black homosexuals in media that have white partners. And so this was another situation where Black people did not want to engage in that dialogue about, what is a quote unquote community issue, but you keep bringing in Beth and Vicky and all these other people. So it's definitely more layered context to that. I'm seeing here, Algie.
I want to address that too.
Yeah, clear.
What you just described, Duke, is maybe more ironic in terms of the white male involvement through the bodies of Black men. It might be deeper than you even realize, possibly, because it was Black men who were into white men who are the ones in power to be in control of the HIV issue for Black people. And that's something to contrast in terms of what success looks like, in terms of a recipe for success and a recipe for failure. The white gays, people like Larry Kramer and other names I can't remember right now, in the ACT UP movement, which was a white gay movement against HIV/AIDS, were white men who loved white men, who were fighting tooth and nail to make sure that white men were saved, and they loved white men at home and in the streets while they protested. The mass majority of the Black men who were involved and who they handed the baton to do HIV work for Black people loved them too, and were in relationships with them too, and had a schism or conflict with their capacity or interest to love a Black person, yet they were the ones in charge. And that was a mistake. It's really a mistake for Black people who don't love Black people as a norm to be in charge of Black lives. White gays didn't have to deal with that, which is one of the reasons why they were so fundamentally successful. It was some of these white men loving Black men, these Black men who love white men got money, got jobs, got prestige, got photo ops, got on TV, and enjoyed being the Black person that white people liked, who became profile, weren't able to be off of this epidemic. In the late 1980s, a doctor.
We thought we could work through it.
Dr. Monago, is your audio is pausing a little bit. It's breaking.
Okay, am I back?
We're gonna give it a little bit and see if you can hold that thought. What I wanted to, in conjunction with Cleo saying, it's very important to note that this is the truth far as who is in charge of loving on the Black community and making sure the Black community is successful. And so oftentimes it is either Black people who are infatuated with white individuals, which has not worked for this community at all. And on top of that, it's often white people who are often in control of the resources and the money in the first place. So it is these individuals that we have to quote unquote go for our quote help and assistance. And something that I know that even when it came to affordable treatment for HIV/AIDS in the Black community, this was something that I'm aware of that white communities had at least 4 to 5 years before it hit some of these more southern, quote unquote, more rural areas of the states. This is something that Black communities did not have access to until 4 to 5 years after white communities had access to the healthcare. Even though same amount of money, it's just that these drugs literally did not come to these communities until 4 to 5 years later. And so it was always this gap of information. And to this day, it's still a gap of information. Like there's things I can drop now. There's a concept, and we'll talk about it later, called U equals U. But this is something that scientists and doctors have known for a couple of years now, and they just started circulating it widely in our communities to be as a form of prevention of HIV transmissions. It's always playing catch up in our communities. It seems like you may be back now, Doctor.
Yeah, is my transmission clearer now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, one of the things I think I was saying before that occurred was in the late 80s, a doctor, an HIV/AIDS doctor who was also an oncologist named Dr. Herman Masonette, invited me to accompany him to a speaking engagement in San Francisco to talk about HIV and AIDS in the Black community. Now, mind you, at this time, Black people were dying. Same gender loving Black men were dying like flies, including the love of my life at the time. And it was a major issue, but Black people were not being properly attended to because of Black lace on the HIV issue. Am I still here?
Yes, you're back.
Okay. Anyway, to make a long story short, after Dr. Masonette spoke, I spoke. And I said to this audience, mostly full of whites and Black people up under whites, that we need to make sure that how we address HIV in the Black community does not come through a gay rights lens, that it is more inclusive and culturally responsive, and that it addressed the issue of same-gender loving people and that gay identified Black people existed, but that it looked at this issue from a spectrum basis, including people who have been incarcerated, who are involved in sex with men because of incarceration. Somebody mentioned survival sex. I mentioned that Black women were at particular risk in our community because of the lack of dialogue and transparency around the sexual spectrum among Black people, and that we could not use a gay rubric as the entree for this issue. And people booed me. People said, get off the stage. People said I was racist. People said that I was homophobic. And I was literally booed. And some of the people that booed me were the Black men looking at their white men for approval, trying to hurry me off the stage because of what I was saying. So that kind of behavior encapsulated the background of a lot of the work that I did whenever I came in contact with the traditional gay system, because it was very, very anti-Black, very much built around white folks and loving white folks if you were Black. One time I spoke at a conference and I told these people that it's important that Black people who love Black people are in leadership of some of these dialogues, because part of the healing process would be for us to see each other loving each other. And in the newspaper the next day, instead of writing that, they said Manago was preaching hate speech. And all I said was, which was really love speech, that Black people who love Black people need to be seen and be central and need to be part of leadership so we can actually know that that's a possibility and feel good about who we are and our lovability. But instead of saying that, I was saying hate speech. So the attack on Black power and possibility and health around HIV and AIDS to this very day, but particularly back then, was very, very strong. Some of you might know that even Magic Johnson, who was an icon back then, a basketball playing icon, came out as HIV positive. And you would think that having the Michael Jackson of sports come out about having HIV, that would have got the Black community on fire to address this issue. But it didn't, because some of Magic Johnson's messaging was confusing, and people who had a more appropriate narrative were not allowed to speak to the, on camera and be part of the narrative. Only white chasing people and ignorant people who really didn't understand these issues, but like white people, therefore they gave them entree, who are allowed to be the spokesperson on this issue. There's never been in the United States major newspapers a Black epidemiologist or journalist who got a chance to have an article on HIV and AIDS and Black men published. To this very day, it's never happened. All those articles are written by white men. So it's been a blackout in this epidemic that we're still dealing with.
In regards to Magic Johnson, we were also intentionally misled and confused with a lot of the media, because the narrative, and I was a child during this time, and the narrative was that Magic Johnson had gotten healed.
I got what?
Healed. Healed. Healing. That was the narrative, and it was for real. It was he was quoted, and I believe in Ebony magazine, but nobody decided to unpack that message. He was speaking figuratively as far as his quality of life and how he was dealing and navigating with the virus. But the narrative that I got as a child, and I didn't learn what was exactly said until I became an adult. The narrative that I got as a child was that he was healed. And later on, when I learned that he still had the virus, I was like, whoa, I thought he was healed. honestly. So that's the type of craziness too that has been allowed to perpetuate in our community in regards to rhetoric and propaganda around the virus.
And one of the religious influence perspectives, which is deep and impactful here, is that Magic Johnson was heterosexual and that he was healable and worthy of being healed compared to the homosexuals because he was indeed a heterosexual. And that's why he had a better track, allegedly, when it came to dealing with HIV and AIDS. As I said earlier, a whole lot of mythology and narratives that were incorrect, dealing with a Black community that was already distracted by issues that were a symptom of racism, like police brutality, etc. When this HIV issue was dropped in our community, we were not prepared, and we had horrible leadership to this very day. HIV is one of the most amateur hour-based public health issues that we've ever faced. I'm sure there were others, but I know about this one from face value that the majority of the people who are the most known when it comes to Black people in HIV don't know nothing about public health. They don't know nothing about behavioral science, made no impact on changing the epidemic, but white people really liked them. So they got a lot of photo ops, but they weren't able to do anything about this disease.
I'm reminded of just different levels of inefficiency. I remember a couple of years ago, I was at one of these LGBTQ queer conferences where they were talking about HIV/AIDS, and they got a group of panelists to talk, and there was two scenarios I want to bring up. One was a Black woman who decided to talk about her experience of when she was diagnosed, and this was a heterosexual Black woman. And she talked about how when she got diagnosed, there was absolutely no services or healthcare that was available for her. She had to go out and build her own network and environment in order to get access to care for other Black women like her, because everything was LGBTQ focused. And she was talking about that particular experience. And then the second one, this is more conceptual. This is more dealing with how we don't make space for the full narrative in our community. We keep pushing certain agendas and stereotypes. There was a family with a son who was diagnosed with HIV after he ran away from home, after he left home because his mother did not approve of his sexuality. And so he, wound up not having a family or backbone care, and he went off to college and unfortunately wound up contracting this virus. But inside of this particular conference, they wanted to do a quote unquote healing ceremony where they brought the mother and the son on stage to talk about their experience, how they healed from it, how they, got back to being good. But what was interesting about this narrative for me was that throughout this narrative, the father was the affirming one. The father was the one who was just like, so what, my son is homosexual. I still love him anyway, and telling, his wife that you should lay off and accept our son. And what was very interesting about this moment is that the father was at the event, but he was not invited to speak on stage. And I was just like, but this is the full narrative of the family. This is the structure. Like, why is the father's perspective missing in this, in an environment, in a room where it's so common to hear that the father is, quote unquote, the one that is least affirming, the one that distances themselves from the son, that this was an example where the father was present and we could have had that full narrative. And it doesn't do our communities justice, in my opinion, when the full imagery isn't shown.
What you're talking about also happens. It affects the messages that are put out about Black women. I think DeQuayla was about to say something.
Yeah. So
go ahead, please. Go ahead and take over with that.
What I'm hearing from y'all basically is that when it comes to prevention, treatment, awareness, we can't rely on white people. We can't rely on the government. We have to rely on ourselves. We have to make conscious decisions every single day to control the narrative and to teach our youth and people that don't know about HIV/AIDS, about HCV, about substance use, but they're not getting that. And they're receiving biased misinformation from school systems, from the media, especially porn, which is a whole nother subject in itself. But yeah, we have to rely on ourselves.
No, you're absolutely right.
We also have to be critical thinkers and decode what's happening around us. You need to understand that the media and all of its subsets and the
Hey, Duke, I just want to explain something to our audience as well. There has been some kind of janky stuff going on with the internet and a lot of live streams.
Apologies.
Yeah, you see DeQuayla, she's been going in and
sad.
out, and Dr. Monago is having some challenges too. The other live streams last night on YouTube and everything were cutting up. So we're gonna work through it, and if it happens, then that's what's going on.
Yeah, thank you for that clarity. It seems like our streams are stable for the moment. Cleo, you're still unstable. I'll let you know when it comes in.
Well, Duke, real quick, I just want to get on that point, and what you and DeQuayla were talking about as far as the materials that we receive or the efforts that we see happening from so-called government or white organizations or whatever. A lot of what's being happening is the narrative around Black men is being corralled into that LGBT format. And then when you have something, any type of phenomena that happens outside of that, there's no way to explain it. Supposedly, there's no way to reconcile it. I was just recently reviewing materials that was sent from an agency. I won't call the name or nothing, but it was supposed to be around NBAD, National Black HIV Day. And it's like, it's gay. And then because there are sisters that are contracting this virus, then there are Black women. So you have gay, and then Black women. And when you look at the materials around Black women, it's like they just exist in a silo. They're just contracting this virus from the sky. There are no men around, and it's not being addressed. And that's something that's actually not even good for Black women to keep promoting this narrative that Black sisters are alone somehow, gonna always be alone, and then just completely ignore the fact that Black women have counterparts. Black women have Black men who love them and interact with them, and sexual health affects both together.
It's ironic that the LGBTQ community, which has spent so many years saying that HIV/AIDS is not a gay disease, has not changed its approach to bringing up awareness about HIV/AIDS, because everything about it has been a gay approach. It has always been done in gay iconography, gay institutions, like they do not broaden their scope when it comes to actually dealing with this crisis in a community of people. And Cleo mentioned it earlier, like, it's just no way that you can attract brothers who have dealt with survival sex and brothers who've been in the prison industrial complex into your messaging around this particular topic. And as I mentioned earlier as well, is clearly the work that is supposed to have been done for Black women has always been an afterthought when it came to these institutions. It's not something that has been built conclusively into their care and their rollout of how they want to help Black women get to a standard of care. It's always been a background. It seems like you may be back on a more stable portion, Cleo.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's frustrating, as you might imagine, because I didn't even know I was frozen until you said so. But I just want to mention that along with this is differently with whatever the heck I was saying earlier. This is just piggybacking what you just said, Duke. Another group of people that always gets neglected, along with heterosexual identified men who have been incarcerated, men who are involved in survival sex, who don't feel like they're part of anything called gay or LGBTQ, or same gender loving and bisexual Black men who just don't feel an affinity to all the LGBTQ rainbow stuff. And that group is much larger than people know. I personally think from experience in terms of people feeling a sense of resistance regarding themselves being immersed in it. I think that's most that I've run into. But a lot of us think white people's, ice is colder and their fire is hotter. And if they do it, it must be good for something. So we jump on board trying to get some kind of sanctuary and ignore the racism. But another strategic mishap that this industry has done is made everything focus on HIV positive people. Now, I want to be clear. I think it's important to focus on HIV positive people. In the beginning of this epidemic, HIV positive people were definitely stigmatized, including within the community of sexual minorities. However, most people learn from success stories. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, what I mean by success stories, way back in the late 90s, the early 90s, I said, along with all these HIV positive people that you keep propping up, you need to prop up somebody who's HIV negative, who has successfully navigated through this society as a so-called high-risk group member who has actively staved all the virus from their lives. That needs to be part of the narrative. That needs to be part of who people hear from. I mean, if you went to go see a dentistry presentation, they're not gonna keep showing you people with no teeth. They're gonna show you people whose teeth are pristine and have been well taken care of as an example of what your teeth can look like if you do the right thing. But in the HIV field, people with HIV, I understand that, I support that, but I would have mixed it up equally with people who are part of a so-called risk group who navigated successfully and didn't get HIV. But people were getting paid for having HIV. People were getting photo ops for having HIV. People were getting services and money for having HIV. So people were even getting themselves infected on purpose who are having economic struggles to get some HIV dollars. The whole industry was incentivizing becoming HIV positive. And that used to make me crazy, but I was marginalized to the extent that they could every time I showed up because I did not go along with the okie doke, the HIV positive, anti-Black okie doke. And that narrative was a strategic problem as well. There was fundamental pushback to talking about HIV negativity and valuing being negative. Now, the white gay community didn't go through this. We went through this in particular because they allow Black people who are HIV positive and anti-Black, again, to be our leaders regarding this whole issue. Very.
And this unfortunate stream, but at this time, while his stream catches up, I'm going to address some of these comments. Roger Williams had mentioned that the challenge is that white systems still control academia, where a lot of the official peer-reviewed information and research come from. That is a significant problem for us, which is why Daquila is right. We have to build up our own institutions. Following that up, we have Anair, who mentioned that, can you shed light into the funding issue related to this? And how can the public advocate that culturally competent interventions reach our community? One thing that I'm aware of, and this also follows up for Roger Williams' point, is even when you are not in a position of power to quote unquote build your own institution, something that you can do is lobby and make sure that these institutions are treating your communities fairly by using a pedagogy or approach that is affirming to your community. One thing that we embrace here at Black Men's Exchange National is a strategy that you can look up called Critical Thinking, Cultural Affirmation, my apologies, CTCA, which is something that we lobby for. Additionally, to your point in there, you are absolutely enabled as a community to lobby to your local council members to make sure that there are bills in place about how the money is divided up. The money gets divided up every year, and they figure out every year exactly what institutions they want to put this money into. And if the community is aware and present about what's going on, they can push that narrative. Something similar has happened to Baltimore, not around HIV/AIDS, but specifically around youth funding, where the community recognized that a bunch of the youth funding was going towards white organizations, and they wanted it specifically to Black organizations. And so they lobbied and got that bill passed and came up with the systems to make sure that that money was circulated in Black communities specifically. And so there's different routes to go about that. I'm sorry, Dr. Nago, your stream had frozen up again. It seems like you're back for the moment, but you did mention, I had took some notes here.
Yeah. Dude, real quick, I want to address that question that Henri asked as well. I like the way you covered the community grassroots end of it, as well, holding your local politicians accountable. Also, from an organizational standpoint, when you organize and you form, groups, agencies, centers, whatever in your community, and you are there's funding out there, and white people are dangling this funding, they're controlling this funding, but you also need to recognize your power. If the dollars are labeled Black, then guess what? They're supposed to go to, Black organizations. And therefore, once you learn critical thinking and cultural affirmation, once you, learn what the agenda needs to be, it's something very simple as having a backbone and being able to stand on it and being able to look white people in the eye and tell them, no, you're wrong. Or maybe not in those words, but I'm the expert on Black people. You call me as the expert on Black people. You may be 60 years old, but guess what? I have more Black years than you do under your belt. So that's one thing we need to emphasize.
But Kashama, I got to ask again, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The white supremacy myth has not lingered this long without being a strategic phenomenon. And what they do now, Kashama, this is inspired by your comments, they get Black people who love white people to be the spokesperson, so it can look like a Black deliverer of the message. So you'll look crazy from in terms of their agenda if you address a Black person like that. Now, I did it anyway. I mean, I was real clear that the majority of the Black men who were in charge, from the White House to the outhouse, were not Black people who love Black people. So they disinvited me from a lot of stuff because they wanted to keep the blackface white train going. But what they've done is change the narrative or change the messenger, Kashama, so it can look like it's an all Black thing. But the majority of the Black people, I may or may not say names before this is over, who have had the position to be in press and be an influencer have been Black men who wouldn't touch a Black person with a 10-foot pole. And that includes on the White House level. So they're constantly strategizing to make it not look like it's racism, but that's white racism in blackface.
No, yeah, I totally agree, and I'm glad you pointed that out because that is a very strategic move that is often used and employed, and we do have to be ready to deal with that.
Yeah.
Took some notes.
I was looking through trying to find notes for when your stream kept interfering. But I'm also looking at the time, and I see here a couple of more bullet points. One thing that we wanted to make sure that we made time to speak about, and this is also a little personal for me as well, oftentimes in this discussion, is especially taking the LGBTQ approach of putting everything in sexuality and gay this and gay that, we miss the other folks who wind up getting this virus not through those means. And so I had a friend who was born HIV positive simply because her mother had it, because her mother was a substance abuse user. And so this is two different versions of how you wind up getting this particular virus. There are people who are doing dirty needle exchanges or not cleaning their needles in between. And there are also individuals who wind up just simply born with the disease as a result of certain birthing situations. It's not common. I want to make sure that's clear. The birthing situations is not common. This was also a myth that was propagated about how often, quote unquote, crack babies and HIV babies were born. However, it is something that happens. Unfortunately, individuals who do wind up getting the virus through substance abuse usage or through birth, still have to deal with the exact same narrative and stigma of being quote unquote promiscuous and quote unquote unsafe and unclean about their sexual practices, even when their transmission had absolutely nothing to do with that particular transmission type. This is something that all of our communities have to get better with. As far as the quote unquote judgment of how individuals in our communities navigate this virus. And even if they did get it through sex, it's not a promiscuous activity because everyone at this point in time should know that it only takes one time to wind up getting this virus. And I know individuals who had sex only once and have now have to take a pill every day in order to maintain their viral load. And so it's just more ways that our community has to become more involved in this discussion. I'm grateful for the Black community members who I've seen who dive into this work. And I want to be very clear, it's so many Black heterosexual men who have dived head into this work who do not get any type of credit. Black heterosexual women as well, who dive head into this work. And they don't get the award platforms, the speaker positions, and the opportunities to talk about how this disease is ravaging their community. But these are the individuals day in and day out who are attempting, even when they don't have the proper protocol or the proper strategy to deal with it because they're working in white institutions, who are attempting to curb this particular disease. Just want to make sure that we mention that. Bongani had mentioned that most of their friends got it and it came from a cheating partner, and that is another situation as well. You can be completely faithful in your relationship. You can be completely faithful in your relationship and you may be with a partner who is unfaithful, and that is another way that people can contract this virus. It has nothing to do with being promiscuous or quote unquote dirty or hoeing and things, all these different negative associations that we have with this particular virus.
But it does lead us into a very important part of this discussion though, Duke, along the line where we went over self-conceptual health as far as how we see ourselves. but that also influences our behavioral health, how we value ourselves, as well as how we value our partners and other people. So especially people who look like us. If you don't value yourself, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to value those who resemble you. You're going to see, the same worthlessness in them that you see in yourself. So that's very interesting, and I'm glad Bongani brought that up in regards to people contracting it from a partner. I'm glad you brought it up in regards to babies contracting it from their parents, because we got to understand too, self-conceptual health helps Black people be better parents. And this day and age, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it is possible to bring a negative child into the world with a positive mother.
Yeah,
if certain precautions are taken.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. As long as the mother is aware and the doctors are aware, there's medicine and approaches that can be done in order to severely limit the likelihood of the baby contracting the virus.
And if mommy isn't questioning her value because she's an HIV positive woman and whatever other trauma and circumstances she's gone through before contracting the virus along that journey.
I'm looking at one of my notes. Cleo mentioned this earlier before the stream started to break up, but when it comes to what we call HIV mascots, who are individuals who get propped up in the community to talk about why you shouldn't or you shouldn't contract this virus, even when they are individuals who had the virus in the first place, it sends a different kind of message to the community, because there's almost no representation of HIV negative mascots, quote unquote, individuals who have lived the lifestyle, individuals who live long, healthy lives of not contracting this virus, being spokespersons on how you can do the same. And this is something that queer institutions have not made space for in our communities. They always put up HIV positive individuals as some kind of scarecrow for the community, which does nothing to help the self-conceptual health of HIV positive persons, nor does it help the self-conceptual health of HIV negative persons who have to receive this messaging, because it puts up this idea that I'm not supposed to be like you. It puts up this othering type of barrier, and we don't address that particular approach that has been going on in LGBTQ queer institutions for quite some time. It's always this idea that I need to scare you into doing the right thing, and you can't scare Black people into doing the right thing. We've seen it all at this point, and so that is another situation that we're dealing with. That's what I wanted to bring up earlier. At this time, I don't know if anyone had a little bit more to say, but we did have a quick slideshow that we wanted to put up. If anyone doesn't have anything more to say, I would love if Adam could put that up. All right, Adam. As mentioned earlier by Kashama, Eazy-E is one of those brothers who would have completely missed the LGBTQ messaging done to quote unquote combat this virus. And these are just some of the individuals that we missed. I know that Adam also had specific imagery at this point now that to speak to more Black women's health issues. If Adam has that image ready, he'll set up. HIV prevention starts with me, women and girls. And so this is just more things to be considerate of when we're dealing with this particular virus. I didn't mention this earlier, but Black Men's Exchange, and this also speaks to one of the questions that we had, Black Men's Exchange is not an HIV organization, but because of the mission statement that we have, because of the care that we have found strategic ways to partner with various institutions who do call themselves to be HIV organizations to make sure they are effectively serving our communities in ways that we see fit, ways that we see effective, in ways that are culturally affirming. And so that is also another route that people can take. Even like everyone is not expected to be a brick builder. I'm not expecting everyone to be a brick builder when it comes to building an institution and things like that. However, we all find ways that we can quote unquote fit in. And that one of those ways is by making sure that the institutions that are inside of your local communities are responsive to the needs in your community. That money is for you, and they have to adhere to that. The only thing that it takes is for someone to call them out on it. Because once you call them, I promise you, once you start calling them out on it, they will start adjusting, because they are contractually obligated to bring that money to you and your community and serve your needs.
But once you get the money, you have to properly administrate the money and properly manage the money, particularly if you care about Black people, because you can be totally in common with the money. There's one organization who made themselves well known in this country, whose director misplaced, in quotes, $500,000, who the feds still give money to because he fits the political agenda of their larger focus. So somebody like myself, who they claim misplaced $20, might get in the paper as somebody who did something wrong. So my point to you, which is why I have never taken $20. The point to make to you is that when you get the money, you have to properly manage it. That's a whole nother meeting. Get the money, but properly use it so you won't have to be destroyed by people who are doing like this and waiting for you to be destroyed if you care about Black people. Because this is not a neutral ground we live on. We live in an anti-Black society. And one of the best examples of that is how the HIV/AIDS epidemic has rolled out and how we're going into year 2021. And Black men who have sex with men are still disproportionately impacted in levels that can be compared to the poorest parts of the world, including poorest parts of Africa in this high-tech country, because the bottom line is that the approach has been destroyed and compromised by all the things we've talked about and things we have not had a chance to talk about. One of the fundamental messages for me is, if you love Black people, that should be a prerequisite, along with skills, to be in charge of Black health. If you don't love Black people, or if your personal life does not involve the actual love of Black people as the norm, and you are anti-Black, no matter how much you impress white people, you should not be in charge of Black life, because then we will fail. And that's one of the fundamental recipes behind Black HIV failure, is the lack of people who care about Black people being in decision-making positions.
To that point, Doctor, there's been various different communities in certain countries in Africa of the quote-unquote poorest class that have been able to curb the transmission rates and stop the transmission rates of HIV/AIDS virus. And researchers have studied and attributed that to the fact that there has been cultural affirmation and a behavioral analysis approach to this virus, and not isolating and siloing it based on sexuality, but based on the well-being of the entire community. And so that has been attributed to, stopping these transmission rates. To that end, something I want to make sure that we say on this particular stream is relatively new rhetoric. I think it's been, being promoted for about 2 years now, even though they've known it for much longer, is the idea or concept of U equals U, which simply stands for undetectable means equals untransmittable. And what that means is, if you happen to be HIV positive, but you do have access to care and you are consistently taking your medicine in order to maintain your viral load, then it is impossible, once you get to undetectable status and you maintain undetectable status, it is impossible for you to transmit the virus. And that is the kind of rhetoric and information that has been missing for our communities for such a long time, because I know for me growing up, it was just always assumed that if you had HIV, that was it. Like, there was nothing else that could happen. Like, it was a death sentence legitimately. And it also meant that anyone who had sex with you was just consistently at risk, unless they, took certain extreme measures in order to make sure that they didn't contract this virus. But undetectable means untransmittable is the walkaway that I want to give you all. Also, something else to consider is that even if you are someone who is HIV positive, if you are drinking a lot of alcohol, it can fluctuate your viral load. It can make it appear that your viral load has become detectable. And so that is something to consider if you are taking medicine in order to maintain your viral load. just some other information for people that want to look into more information around HIV/AIDS transmissions. It is easily available online by the CDC. But I think at some point today, we're probably going to drop the link to a video that BMX has done many years ago addressing the Black HIV/AIDS crisis in America. And so you can, if you want to follow up more about this particular topic and more of the self-conceptual issues that we deal with as a people, that is a major barrier to us being done with this virus, refusing this package. Check out and be ready for that video.
There's one more thing. There's one more thing that I don't think we've addressed. Maybe when I was crashed and wasn't here, you've already addressed it. But the issue of PrEP, we can't ignore that because that's the magic bullet that's being presented now. Don't necessarily be concerned about changing your behavior. Just do what you do and take the pill. We have a program called Black Men Have Options. I think Adam has the graphic for that. I guess he could bring it up while I'm talking.
Yep, there we go. Keep talking, doctor.
Yeah. What we do regarding biomedical treatment options is talk about it amidst all options that we have to make sure that people who are HIV negative stay negative. Some people have taken PrEP and according to some reports have done well. Some people have taken PrEP and it's been disastrous. Some people refuse to take PrEP. Some people are allergic to PrEP. So there's a really multiple relationship to PrEP that's out there that's not really being talked about. What's being talked about is the pushing of PrEP. What we do, instead of simply pushing PrEP, we alert people of its existence, that it's there, and what the reportable facts have been regarding how people have used it, and that it has been a barrier to HIV transmission in the human body. However, we also talk about behavioral prevention methodologies so people can not get it without having to take medicine if they choose that. So there's more to talk about that. So you can call that text number that I'm sure Adam will put up at some point to get more information. But we're into making sure that our people know that they have options, meaning that you don't have to just do what everybody's telling you to do. That may or may not work for you, but learn that there are options for us to keep us from getting HIV and or spreading HIV.
Yes. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up today's HIV/AIDS awareness broadcast. Again, every February 7th of every year is National HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. And we wanted to take the time to make honor of that. Yesterday was a Sunday, and so we came here for the working day to make sure that we speak to our populace. Thank you for tuning in with us. Thank you for staying with us, especially to those who watch this in the future. Again, join our community by texting 410-826-6264. You have opportunities to suggest discussions. You have opportunities to maybe come up here and maybe you want to co-host an entire stream with us at some point. If you need access to navigation services or have suggestions for someone who needs access to navigation services, you can also take care of that within that number. That screen is up right now, again, with our Mr. Quayla Hopper. With that being said, you all, I think we're done here, and I want to leave you all with what the next health education live stream topic is, which is very fitting for not only Black History Month, but very relevant to what we are discussing today. And so that topic coming up, and I'm going to get that date here for a second, is decolonizing sexuality. That is going to be on Friday, February 26th. Friday, February 26th. Decolonizing sexuality. And so that is a live stream that will actually be led by Kashama Sankofa here. And so that will be very, very, very fun and engaging and educational.
No doubt. No doubt.
Yeah. Thank you.